July 31, 2024. At an altitude of over 3 kilometers above the Uinta Ridge, a single-engine Cessna banks into a left turn. A small hatch opens in its belly, and a cascade of silver pours into the thin air. 350 live trout, each shorter than a matchbox, fall toward the lake from a height of 50 meters. No one teaches them to fold their fins in midair. No one guides their impact with the surface. And yet, nearly all of them will survive. This is the story of a tiny fish that defied physics, defied extinction, and forced American biologists to rewrite what's even possible in the restoration of mountain ecosystems. The story of a program that dozens of online videos portray as absurd or mistaken. UTA lost 35,000 fish over 69 years. The truth is completely different. These fish aren't lost, they're dropped every summer. And nearly every single one makes it to its first algae. I'll explain exactly how this mechanism works, what it saved, and why a fierce debate still rages around it, one where neither side wins outright. To understand why Utah repeatedly opens the belly of an airplane above the high country, you first have to accept one uncomfortable fact. What tourists see from the trail, the mirror surface of an alpine lake, the pure air, the dazzling snowfields, isn't a picture of living nature. It's a biological void. Tens of thousands of years ago, retreating glaciers left behind hundreds of deep water-filled basins in the Rockies. Perfect, cold, oxygen-saturated, and completely isolated. No stream connects them to the rivers below. No fish could climb up past the multi-tiered waterfalls. The lakes looked healthy, but almost nothing lived in them above the insect level. Thousands of years of silence above a bed of pure glacial sand. The Uinta Ridge in northeastern Utah is the only major mountain range in the Rockies that runs east-west instead of north-south. Within its territory lies the High Uintas Wilderness, covering over 160,000 hectares. Inside it are about 1,000 mountain lakes. Nearly 600 of them are deep and cold enough to support trout year-round, and more than 200 are stocked from the air every year. Many are above 20,500 meters. Some require a 3-day hike with a heavy pack, and no guarantee you'll make it back on the same trail. 200 years ago, there wasn't a single trout here. Today, anglers catch fish longer than their forearms in these lakes. Between those two sentences lies an entire engineering catastrophe. In the first half of the 20th century, Utah tried to stock the high country the way everyone else did, with pack mules. From the valley hatchery, fingerlings were loaded into milk cans with water, strapped onto animals, and hauled upward. Sometimes the trip took 5 days. Water was changed in creeks, ice was added, oxygen was pumped in by hand. It didn't help. By the time the caravan reached the lake, up to 70% of the fish were floating belly up in the cans. Mules slipped off screes. In 1946, in Round Valley Canyon, a man and 2 horses were killed. In 1955, the Duchesne County Ranger wrote a dry line in his report. 9 out of 10 cans lost on the way to Allen Lake. 9 out of 10. The program was dying, not from a lack of fish, from logistics, from gravity, distance, and time. And then someone at the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources asked a strange question. What if you removed everything that sits between the hatchery and the lake? What if there was nothing between them but air? In 1955, they ran the first experiment. A small plane, a tank of water, a manual release gate. They dropped a batch of brook trout into a lake in the northern Uintas. A week later, a crew hiked in and set nets. The fish were there, alive, active, feeding. From 1956 onward, Utah switched to aerial delivery as its primary method. It hasn't stopped for a single year since. 69 straight field seasons. And here, it's important to shift your perspective. The plane in this story isn't a noble savior or a cute social media stunt. It's a tool. A precisely calibrated machine where every variable is tuned for a single task. To deliver the maximum amount of living mass from point A to point B in the minimum time with the minimum contact. Once you understand how this machine is assembled, you stop being surprised that it works. First, fish size. The plane carries fingerlings ranging from 2.5 to 7 centimeters long. Not because larger fish aren't available, but because the physics of falling works differently for small objects. A tiny fish has such a high surface-to-mass ratio that air slows it down almost like a parachute. The terminal velocity of a trout fingerling is about 25 kilometers per hour. Hitting the water isn't a catastrophe, it's a hard slap. An adult trout would be turned into pulp by such a fall. The fingerling survives. Second, drop height. Pilots stay no higher than 50 meters above the lake's surface. Any higher, and the spread across the water increases, sending more fish onto the shore. Any lower, and the risk of hitting a cliff or a pine tree rises. 50 meters is the sweet spot, refined over decades of flying in conditions where every lake sits in a bowl of vertical walls and surprise winds. Third, the water cocoon. The fish aren't dropped as dry cargo. Water is fed into the plane's holding tank, and at the moment the gate opens, what falls isn't fish, but a column of water with fish inside it. That column breaks apart into droplets in the air, but each droplet carries a fingerling in its own protective film down to the last meter. The impact with the surface is softened, a wet fish in wet air entering a wet medium. Fourth, precision. The plane has GPS. The cockpit holds a map with lake coordinates refined over decades of flight routes. The pilot isn't ruly over the water. The pilot aims for a circle 40 to 50 meters in diameter at speeds exceeding 140 kilometers per hour, with one attempt. One drop, one load per pass, up to 40 lakes per flying day, 40 and fifth frequency. A lake isn't stocked once and forgotten. The cycle repeats every 2 to 3 years because most Uinta basins lack flowing tributaries or gravel beds of the right size for spawning. The fish that arrive there generally don't reproduce. They grow, feed the ecosystem, get caught by anglers, and are replaced by the next batch. The program isn't a gift. It's a subscription, 5 levers, 1 tool, and a result that nobody believed at first. When an independent group of ichthyologists came in the 1960s to check what actually survived a drop, they expected to see 30 to 50%. That would have already been better than mules. They found over 90%. Modern estimates from the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources put fingerling survival rates between 95 and 99%, depending on lake depth and oxygen quality in the tank. 99. In other words, out of those 35,000 lost fish that get written about, the average loss is fewer than 350 per entire season. The rest swim on grow. Live until the day someone with a fishing rod sits down on a rock and waits. And here the story stops being an engineering anecdote and becomes a story of return. Because alongside the program, Utah began reviving something thought almost extinct. By the late 1960s, the Bonneville cutthroat trout, an interior subspecies, was on the brink of total extinction. Invasive species, destroyed spawning grounds, and dried up lower rivers had squeezed it. By 1970, specialists counted fewer than a dozen sustainable populations in the entire basin. Fewer than a dozen. The plane became not just a way to deliver any fish anywhere. It became a way to carefully distribute the remaining pure Bonneville cutthroat lineages into high, isolated, safe lakes, places where invasive competitors, poachers, and predator pike from the reservoirs below couldn't reach. By 2010, the Bonneville cutthroat trout was removed from the federal candidate list for extinction. Its range had expanded dozens of times over, not because of a wilderness sign, because of an airplane. The first time naturally spawned young were found in one of the upper Uinta lakes, from an adult batch that had been dropped there. It was, in the words of a county biologist, one of the quietest celebrations of my career. Nobody applauded. A counter just touched a number that had taken 40 years to reach. 40 years. 4 generations of scientists passing the same coordinates on the same map to each other. But for all its success, the project is far from untroubled, and the tension isn't about the plane. The anglers and water managers say it straight. Without the aerial program, half of mountainous Utah would turn into a postcard with no life inside. Thousands of families travel to the Uintas specifically to fish. Fishing means licenses, taxes, hotels, gas, the economy of small mountain towns. It means funding that flows back into protecting the same wilderness. Without fish, not just recreation collapses, the financial model of conservation collapses. The ecologists answer differently. Many of these lakes were designed by nature to be fishless. For millennia, endemic communities evolved in them. Unique species of amphibians, relict crustaceans, mayfly larvae that stand no chance against trout. Introducing a predator fish into a lake that never had one can, within a decade, wipe out the local population of long-toed salamanders, or Rocky Mountain-tailed frogs. And no quota revision will ever bring them back. Several scientific papers from the early 2000s documented declines in amphibian numbers, precisely in those basins where trout are regularly dropped. Not all of them, but enough to seep out of academic journals and into public hearings. In response, Utah began excluding certain lakes from the program and keeping them fishless. The high Uintas wilderness now officially has dozens of water bodies where fish drops are forever forbidden. That's a compromise. It's not a victory. Anglers lose access to beautiful places. Ecologists lose part of their argument because neighboring lakes are still stocked. Every year, the boundary map is redrawn, and every year the debate starts over. Neither side wins cleanly. It's the end of July again. The Cessna banks again over a range more than 1 billion years old. A chain of lakes passes beneath the wing, lakes that 1,000 years ago held only a mirror. Today they hold shadows. Shadows that move against the light. Shadows that rise to the surface when the first raindrop falls. Every summer, a new batch. Every 2 years, a new cycle. Every decade, a new generation of anglers who, for the first time in their lives, cast a line into water where their grandparents would have caught nothing but the reflection of their own faces. The plain banks. The gate opens. Another mouthful goes out into the thin air. Not a fall, a mouthful. The mountains have been breathing fish for 69 years, and they will keep breathing. In the next video, we'll go even higher to a frozen plateau in Mongolia, where biologists are bringing back a species that hasn't been seen in the wild for exactly 40 years. And the way they're doing it looks even crazier than an airplane over Utah.